Harry the Prairie could get into trouble. I was flying one time, and my boy was probably 4, and he was following me, and Harry the Prairie would come to the lure like a missile. And my boy, unbeknownst to me, had reached into my bag behind me, and he had the lure line, and he's flipping it around, and Harry the Prairie came in and smacked him in the head.
Hey, how's it going, everyone? Welcome back for another episode of the Falconry Told podcast, and appreciate you coming back as we continue on with this series that's brought to you all by the Arizona Falconers Association. I want to go ahead and give a quick shout out to one of our newest sponsors, being Baba Yaga Crafts out of Poland. If you haven't had a chance to check out his amazing work yet, I highly recommend you do so. He makes some really awesome handcrafted quality equipment. And my personal favorite, as I've mentioned before here on the podcast, are the anklets that he makes with the Marshall Easy Twist nuts sewn into the anklets. It's one of my favorite pieces of equipment that he makes, and the link to get to his Facebook and Instagram are on our website at falconrytold.com, as well as his email. So hit him up. It's definitely worth your time to try and get some awesome new quality gear that's handcrafted by him. And like I said, you won't regret taking the time to check out his stuff. It's really great quality. All right, and our series featuring falconers from the great state of Arizona continues on. After finishing up our conversation with Randy Hale up in Cornville, we made the next 3 to 4 hour trek down to Tucson and met up with Tim Riordan, where we discussed with Tim the early days of trying to kind of get peregrine take back. And yeah, I can only imagine all the work that really went into that. He touches on some of that stuff briefly, amongst other things, and of course aspects of his falconry career. So hope you all enjoy this next installment of the Arizona Falconers Association series, and here we go. We'll go ahead and start off a little cheers here.
Okay.
Go ahead and, there we go. Thank you. Yeah, and appreciate the Modelo too, by the way. Yeah, man, there's not very many things that I've come to enjoy more than, just aside from flying the birds, just sitting around and having these conversations with guys like yourself. And, I don't know if you knew this about me. I kind of talked earlier to Randy about this, but Arizona in general is always going to be kind of near and dear to me in a way. I spent about a year, learning how to do this stuff, the audio stuff. Mm-hmm. Right out of high school, for about a year, I lived right on the Tempe Mesa border, and really enjoyed living out here. It's always going to be, very fond memories for me. And so I was out there for about a year, and yeah, I mean, ironically enough, I haven't even been. This is about 20 years. I haven't been around anywhere near here in 20 years. Wow. And so I used to come down and visit a friend in Tucson here, like almost, I don't know, I would say at least a couple times a month while I was living up there. Mm-hmm. And then I would make almost every weekend trips up to Sedona, and got a lot of fun memories around here. So It's been nice. I'm glad that I've gotten a chance to come see you all.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, I'm glad you're here.
Yeah. No, it's much appreciated. And, but yeah, I mean, as far as this area, how long have you lived like around Tucson or around this part of Arizona?
I've been in Tucson since 1986. That's 37 years, I think. Nice. Yeah, I grew up in Albuquerque and went to school, and then decided I would try the desert.
I mean, if that's where you came from and stuff, it wasn't much of a shock for you moving here, right?
Even growing up in Albuquerque, which is a high desert, coming here, I know at one point I was like, this is a desert, I mean, saguaros, and it took a little getting used to, but boy, one winter here and you begin to see what this desert's all about, you know.
Yeah, that was the one thing that I remember being, well, I guess one of the many things that I can remember being so special about kind of living in this state, or parts of the state that are like that anyway, where basically it's like 8 to 9 months out of the year, it's perfect weather every single day. Mm-hmm. Nice sunny day, 80-something degrees, zero humidity and stuff. And everybody always dreads the 3 or 4 months of, the 120-degree weather or whatever.
Right.
I always tell people it's like, just get over it. I mean, the 120, it really feels like 90 to 100, to the like the rest of us would, have to live with humidity. But
yeah,
anyway,
no hurricanes here, so we're good. Yeah.
Well, there is that too. I don't really hear very many tornadoes or anything else coming through here either.
Right.
I mean, your car might melt.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's another form of natural disaster, I guess. But, well, I mean, so as far as that goes, your transition, I mean, what brought you out here then initially?
Actually, I'd gone to school with the guy, and I wanted to come someplace and do something. I was going to pursue construction in some order to earn a living. And Tucson had it had the best construction economy of any place in the nation under 1 million people. Didn't want to go a big place. I knew I wanted to be in the Southwest for sure. Didn't want to go back to Albuquerque. So I came here for the economy, which is kind of ironic because it turned out to be kind of ground zero for peregrines, Yeah, which, I knew that didn't even figure in back then. But I guess my degree is in theology, and I'll say that the Lord works in mysterious ways because he put me in the right place.
Yeah, no, I mean, I figured, I mean, at the time that I was even here, I mean, even back in, which was 2001, 2002, it was already like the fastest growing state at that time. I think Phoenix was like the actual fastest growing city, if I remember. I can't remember the exact statistic. But yeah, I can imagine that there would have been a lot of work opportunity.
Oh yeah,
for
yeah,
that
there was, and then of course the economy took a dump. But you learned you make it through those low spots, and then you go through. And it turned out to be it was perfect for me because I wanted to work for myself. It suited my lifestyle. So, and it definitely took a while, and I figured out at some point I needed to be a licensed contractor, which is a pain in the butt. But I did it all, and again, it suited my lifestyle. I worked for myself. I could name my hours. I could go do what I wanted to do.
Most falconers' dream, in other words.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I've dreamt of that at times, and the closest thing I've come to being able to relate to that somewhat is kind of doing the contract stuff the last couple of years. But unfortunately, you kind of have to go where the availability is at any given time, which doesn't always play into the hand that you would like to be dealt necessarily. It kind of turns into that whole got to play with the cards that you're dealt, instead of, stacking the deck in your favor.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, as far as that, I mean, you've lived here a long time then. I mean, I can only imagine the amount of growth in this area that you've seen during that time.
Yep.
I mean, how has that affected? I mean, how many spots have you lost? How much have you had to readjust because of all that?
Well, I went through it in Albuquerque even before I left there, because I remember a place where I had caught a prairie and I went back, to see my dad or whatever in Albuquerque, and there was a mall there. So I saw that happen. But here, so many fields. We've had all these fields, because I fly falcons. I was always looking for open fields, and some of the fields, especially when you kind of have the boom and bust economy, they'll clear big areas and then everything goes bust. And so you've got these fields that come back and they're full of weeds and, perfect for hunting quail or flying pigeons or whatever. And, but there's one place that would be kind of a Hall of Fame. We called it the Thunderdome. A guy found it was a abandoned gravel pit. And that gravel pit used to flood, and it was just a mecca. It was right next to the Santa Cruz River, which flows because of the sewage treatment plant. But there would just be tons of ducks there. And I liked my old bird Mystique. That's where she killed her first duck. Well, if you go to the Thunderdome today, there's a commercial building there. They filled it. It was a huge pit. Took them years, and it was just construction rubble, but they filled it in with rubble. And I told somebody I should have taken a pair of old hawk bells or something and thrown it in the hole when they were
gone and like every year just go back there and play taps.
Yeah. And I did, I had a little tiercel, it was a Barbary Peels tiercel that I flew in a field, and he was just a tremendous little dove and quail hawk. And when they developed that field, I did go back, and there was a kind of a drainage out of the field that was rip-wrapped. And I took as best I could remember, I put some hawk bells into the riprap where he had caught his very first dove. So, yeah, I've definitely seen things change.
Yeah, I can only imagine. It's amazing how, as time goes on, I mean, we kind of have a tendency to be kind of a nostalgic and sentimental bunch anyway. Mm-hmm. And it's the same everywhere. Unfortunately, I've had this conversation a million times, and I'm sure I'll have it a million more. But it really is amazing. I mean, even just in the short time, my first apprentice season was fall of 2015. So it's not like I've been doing this for a really long time myself either. But even in just the short time that I consider myself, being in the sport, I mean, it really is just amazing how many amazing like rabbit fields and how many different places that we've lost.
Yep.
And it's one of those things that's going to be an ongoing topic of conversation until it's all gone eventually, probably.
Yep.
But
we all were so concerned about being able to have birds, when we went through the whole endangered species things and peregrines being listed, and now we can pretty much have any falcon we want to fly, or hawk, for that matter. But having the game and the place to fly them is what the future is all about. That is the part that's very worrisome.
Yeah. And, I don't know what the solution really to that is, or if there even is one.
Well, for me, that I will continue to always give my money to Ducks Unlimited and Trout Unlimited and Quail Forever. And, the places that, I like the fact that they buy easements. They'll never be built on it. And especially when we think about things like sage grouse and that kind of, you just can't buy enough easements, but if people can work at it, chip away at it as best they can that way, I think we can ensure that maybe there'll be corners where the game exists,
It sounds like you've been kind of donating to those places for a while. A long time. I mean, so how does that work? I mean, if someone wants to look into that and research, I mean, who gets access to those lands? What kind of priority happens with that? I mean, does anybody really?
Well, like Ducks Unlimited, especially, almost all of the property they buy it's either property that, if it is prairie potholes where the ducks nest, people go there in the fall and set up, and the duck hunters go put their decoys out there and shoot ducks up there. So most of it, I would say, is available to hunters. And the same thing that, I do the Trout Unlimited thing too. And they're, what they're trying to do is limit cattle access to the streams and make sure there is public access, and, improving the habitat at the same time. So I think it's not just about keeping people away at all. And I think that's especially Ducks Unlimited. They definitely set the tone for any organization, because they're duck hunters and they are the premier conservation organization in this country. There was a guy down in El Paso one time, Bill Meeker, he breeds falcons, and Bill told me there was a limited prairie chicken hunt in New Mexico for a while, and then the prairie chickens numbers kept going down, and they were going to do it out on white sands. They talked about having a limited hunt, and Bill said, if the Game and Fish would just do a raffle for 2 birds, every bird dog guy in a 5-state area would put in for that raffle. They would put their money down to try and get in there to hunt those prairie chickens, but they don't. And so they're not going to get any support that way. And, I understand. I mean, some birds, we need to not hunt them, that's for sure. But But I thought his point was very valid. The best way to get people involved is to try and give them a piece of that pie, even if it's a very small piece of pie.
Yeah, and that's why I was curious, because I mean I've heard of all those organizations, and just being devil's advocate, I think unfortunately there's other corporate entities, though, some of which are big chain corporate entities that turn around and they will take profits and buy up land and stuff, but then nobody gets access to it, and it becomes something that I think that a lot of people that were encouraged to, buy and shop through or whatever thought that, money would be going towards one thing, but haven't gone towards another.
Right.
So, all that being said, if that's really the case and stuff, which it sounds like it is, for those other, entities, then great. I mean, how does a person then go about finding where these pieces of land and stuff are? Do they have a way that you can look that up? Or?
Well, yeah, I'm sure there is. I know that both Trout Unlimited and Ducks Unlimited, one thing that I've seen, because I have done this for a lot of years, especially Ducks Unlimited. I don't know how many years I've done it, but what I feel there is a danger of is the same thing that happened in Great Britain, is that hunting becomes a sport of the elite. If you have the money, you can, and quail hunting in the South is that, the bobwhite numbers went down. Now there's plantations. And if you've got big bucks, you can go down there, and they raise these plantations that are groomed for quail. There's a lot of quail, but it's for people who have money. So that's something that I think about as you talk about this. Yes, I can give my $40 a year, but what about the people that are going to give them $400,000? They might get a little better access. So
I'm sure it's just another one of those classic examples of like a double-edged sword, or, there's always a flip side to every coin. Without any kind of money to use for lobbying or buying land or anything like that, then nothing will ever get done.
Right.
And, the status quo is just going to be more people developing and that much more land being lost. Right. So on the other hand, it's like, yeah, you still want it to somehow be available to everybody, though, because, for obvious reasons. So yeah, finding the middle ground on that, I think, is just going to continue to get harder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's not one I can give you any answers on there.
I don't think any of us have them. Yeah,
because I don't got $1 million.
Well, yeah, I guess, unless you're Bill Gates rich or something, and can afford to buy all these bazillions of acres of land in these primo areas, for having wildlife on and stuff and cultivating. Well, yeah, I guess ultimately we're all kind of at a disadvantage.
Yep. I have been up on Ted Turner's ranch up in, it's up by Butte, maybe Bozeman, Montana. And I went up there with some guys, and we were looking for goshawks and stuff, and we drove through there, and basically you couldn't leave the road. That was the thing. You could go in the ranch, and you could drive, and there was buffaloes, and I went over trout streams like, I would pay to be able to, but you couldn't do a darn thing in there but look. So, but, it was all conservation ranching, So, and he's got a big ranch. I know Matt Mitchell's has dealt with some of the stuff in the ranch that he has over in New Mexico. And I think he put black-footed ferrets, and it's good stuff, but it is pretty much hands-off as far as I know. So,
yeah. Like I said, I don't think there's ever going to be a good answer unless you just happen to win the lottery or fall into money. But at any rate, well, I know that, like you said, you kind of had a start in New Mexico, and you kind of I know you're kind of talking before we got going about some of your experiences, starting out there, and talking about how well, I mean, mentioning Matt again, how, you ironically enough also kind of started into falconry about the same time as him and got, like a bird around the same time as him as well and everything. And go ahead and I guess just talk some about how you started in with all of this and what bit you, so to speak, about it.
Well, the first thing I can tell you, when I was asked to do this, I went and I scrolled through all the people you had interviewed, and I saw Matt. So I listened to it, and what was neat is I mean I lived all that. Matt and I did it side by side, but Matt has a different memory of things than I do, and he recalled things that I might not have recalled. And he probably has a better memory than me too, because I was just like, wow, I'd forgotten all that. But we lived about a block apart. We were going to school together, and a guy walked down the street with a red tail on his fist, and he really wasn't a falconer. He was just a guy that he found out how to catch hawks. And Matt and I, before that, had been catching snakes and lizards and had tortoises. We'd made our own have-a-heart traps and caught quail. And, if it was alive, we wanted to catch it. And that hawk, I have a memory of seeing that guy walk down the street. And Matt and I met him, and he wasn't the easiest guy to deal with. We considered him the neighborhood bully, but we became friends, and he became a real falconer too. He's probably still doing it today, but he made us a Swedish goshawk trap, and I know Matt has told this story also. It was huge. It was 3 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet, made out of wood and chicken wire. And he admitted later he just didn't think it would ever work. But we'd go down to the cemetery, and we'd take mice, and there were kestrels down there, and that was probably about, I don't know, I'm going to say 8 blocks anyway. Getting up at the crack of dawn in the middle of winter and carting that box. And I know at least more than once our mice died. They froze to death. But lo and behold, we caught a male kestrel, and that was our first bird. And we got a few books. Maybe Bruce gave us books. I can't remember, but a manual falconry for you. There were not books available. And so we began to learn a little bit about it. And we moved on to the first birds we really flew were burrowing owls. And we had made have-a-heart traps, which we caught everything in. And we saw the burrowing owls with they could have 6-8 babies running out of their holes. We just made like a tunnel where if they wanted to come out, they'd have to go through the trap. And we caught 2 little eyas burrowing owls, and they were a blast. They were imprinted to us. I remember one of the notable things we did, there was a driving range that was open at night. And we'd take those owls out there at night. They'd sit on our finger, and the big lights are up there, and they'd fly up in the light. You'd lose them, and they'd catch moths. And then at some point, you just stick your finger up in the air and whistle, and out of the darkness, they'd come back to us. It was amazing that we did it and never lost them. That might have been the biggest. We tried to get them to kill mice and stuff. We never, but they were just a blast. We got to fly them. And so I think the first big hawks we ever had, we took 2 eyas Swainson hawks. And I look back at that. I thought about it after I listened to your podcast with Matt, that I think we saw a Ferruginous nest too. And not knowing anything about anything, we said, let's do the Swainsons, not the Ferruginous. Things might have gone differently if we'd gotten the Ferruginous. But we got these Swainsons, very cool birds, beautiful birds, trained them, flew them, just couldn't get them to kill stuff. They were neat birds, and we got experience with larger raptors. But then from there, we moved on and got red tails. And before we were even driving, we met a guy who had a Harris hawk. And he was from Texas, he had to be among the very first wave of people flying Harris Hawks in the United States. I think these guys, people had been to Mexico or South America, and they'd figured it out. But he had this female Harris Hawk. He'd had it for 4 years. And he introduced us to it. We went out, we watched Agatha, this big old Harris Hawk, catch rabbits. And from that, it was kind of interesting because then we get into high school. Right out of high school, I think Matt went and got an eyas Harris Hawk. And Matt became, and really still is, one of the most badass Harris Hawk flyers I've ever seen. I mean, he could kill stuff with that Harris Hawk. And things changed for me at that point in time because I found out I had a very bad allergy to rabbit fur. Just horrible. Cats were the same way. But I'd catch rabbits and I'd break out in hives and I'd get blood on their hands, and it just freaked me out. And so what I did is I switched to Cooper's Hawks. And I think that was kind of where my destiny started because I also started messing with bird dogs. But, Matt just went big time into Harris Hawks. And I remember one day, we'd go out kind of the same areas. There was a lot of game outside of Albuquerque. And I was coming back from flying my Cooper's Hawk. Don't remember what I had done with the Cooper's Hawk, but saw Matt. And he was coming out of the field and he looked like he was kind of dragging stuff. It's like, what is he doing? He had 5 jackrabbits. He'd gone out and he's dragging back 30 pounds of meat. I was like, holy crap, Matt. Yeah, and I've seen a lot of people fly Harris Hawks since then, and Matt is at the top of the heap as far as I'm concerned. He just knows. Well, Matt told me one time. He said the way I do it is I'm ruthless. Everybody wants to keep their birds happy. Matt wants to see his birds kill stuff. So, and he does a damn good job of it. And that is falconry. So,
well, and inevitably that's what usually tends to make your birds happiest anyway.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the cycle, so to speak.
Right.
But
and I've seen so many people, especially as Harris Hawks became pervasive. I mean, they're the most common bird in falconry in the United States. I've seen so many people fly them and they catch stuff, but they just kind of catch stuff here and there. And, if you bear down on it, and I'm not advocate starving birds. It's just you got to manage their weight. I mean, then at whatever point Matt started flying falcons and he started flying prairie falcons. And again, he was very, very successful because he knew how to lean on them. They were passage prairies too. And, you just, what was it Harry used to say? Fat prairie. I forget he had a saying, but they're just you're never going to have fun with a fat prairie. But it was after that point in time that I started flying prairies. And I think my real love for birds started there. I can't say that the passage female prairies, we flew them, we caught ducks with them. They were never my favorite bird, but they were what was available at that point in time. And we learned with them. And it set us up for, then at some point I flew Cooper's Hawks and prairies, and I had a lot of success with the Cooper's Hawks. I had some eyases that and German short hairs. I got into German short-haired pointers, and I killed a bunch of quail with Cooper's Hawks and short hairs. Had a lot of fun, but once I moved to Tucson, I kind of went straight to prairies, got a passage prairie, and again, I think I as I told you, I kind of did the 12-step program off of Cooper's Hawks. I met Harry, and that was the timing there was a little, to meet Harry McElroy and try and get yourself to quit flying Cooper's Hawks was. And getting to see Harry fly them, the master, that was a lot of fun. But what I saw, when I went out with Harry, especially, Harry was going out and catching quail every day with pointing dogs and Cooper's hawks, and then Harris hawks, and then Aplomado falcons. But I was, my heart yearned for falcons. And it's like, I could do what Harry's doing, but I want to do it with a falcon. And at one point, Harry gave me a bird, Harry the prairie. I think it was actually a captive bred prairie, tercel prairie. He called him the troublesome one. You'll sit with Harry. He's a trip. But I think he flew off on Harry more than once, and Harry didn't like that. So he gave me this Harry the prairie. And right away, I had been out with Harry and seen him fly Harry the prairie and catch quail with him. And Harry said he would give them to me. And I started catching quail. And then I remember Harry the prairie was full of surprises. I put a quail in a launcher, and what I was doing was working the dog with him. And I'm bringing in, so I'm trying to have some control over the situation, which is foolhardy in the sport of falconry. But I've got the quail in the launcher, I've got the dog pointing, and Harry the prairie goes out about a quarter of a mile, and he just starts doing tight circles. And I didn't know there was a pond there. And I ran over there, and there was like 24 teal on that pond. And he came right through the trees and caught his first duck. And so I learned to love that bird. Another story I could tell you about that bird. It was a pretty interesting time for me. I did spent a lot of time with dog trainers, and got a lot of pigeons for hawk food. And I got some pigeons. I had fed pigeons that had been shotgunned before in the past with my Cooper's hawks in Albuquerque. Not a problem. I started feeding these pigeons to my Harry the prairie, and I had that Barbary teals tercel, and they both got lead poisoning. And we weren't ever sure. They felt like there might actually have been some kind of a soluble lead, like these pigeons might have actually got into toxic slurp, because they did find a few pellets in their crops, but not enough to warrant. Harry the prairie, I think this gal Stormy, the vet, said that he had the highest lead level of any bird they'd ever seen that was still alive. And it was amazing what she put a catheter in his leg and did the whole leaching out the lead thing and saved him. I remember Stormy, so that bird meant a lot to her, and I thanked her. I remodeled her room and did a bunch of stuff to thank her for having done that. But I went out with Harry the following fall, and Harry and I were flying Harry the prairie, and we had a dog on point, and Harry the prairie went up into the stratosphere, which, being the troublesome one. And we both thought we saw more than one bird up there. Signal disappeared, got the dogs, got the telemetry, walked a long ways, came over a hill, and 2 golden eagles took off. And we found Harry the prairie's bells. No, we didn't even find his bell. We found the transmitter, which I had on a plate on his tail. No grommets, no bells. So,
yeah.
Yeah, that was, for me, I think that was the first bird I ever had killed. I'd had a bird electrocuted before, but I'd never had a bird killed by another raptor. But I remember my boy, Harry the prairie, could get into trouble. I was flying one time, and my boy was probably 4, and he was following me, and Harry the prairie would come to the lure like a missile. And my boy, unbeknownst to me, had reached into my bag behind me, and he had the lure line, and he's flipping it around, and Harry the Prairie came in and smacked him in the head. And my wife was not happy when I went home, but I remember when I came home and I put Harry, I was sad because it was a neat bird. I came home and I put his tail feathers on the table, and my wife and my boy were watching television or something. And I said, Harry the Prairie got killed by an eagle. And Timothy goes, yay! Thanks, son.
Yeah. You were probably looking in the wrong place for sympathy at that moment in time. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's an unfortunate ending that a lot of falconry birds tend to meet, especially the falcons that are flown out west. It's a lot of them have been killed by golden eagles, unfortunately.
I tell you, Harry McElroy, man, I don't know how many birds he's had. And he had a goshawk killed by a red tail. I mean, it's non-ending list. And of course, when you start flying oplamatos, everything wants to eat oplamatos. But yeah, I've told young falconers that when you get into falconry, there's a lot of fraternities within the falconry community that you don't want to join. Like I've had a bird electrocuted fraternity. I've had a bird killed by eagles. There's a lot of fraternities you want to stay away from.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter how much you want to stay away from them, though. Eventually, you end up joining one of them.
Yes,
it's just inevitable.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody that's done this for any prolonged amount of time that's not become a seasoned member of one of those said fraternities. So.
Yep, you're right.
Yeah, but well, I mean, kind of going back then. I mean, I kind of regretted not being able to talk to Randy more about this whenever I did my recording with him earlier today. And I told him we'd probably end up having to do a part 2 sometime, because I don't think that there's enough information out there kind of readily available for people to either read or hear people talk about as far as flying Cooper's hawks. It seems like, that still remains for a lot of people as the enigma, so to speak, of I don't know, like odds are if a falconer's been successful with all these different species of birds and they've failed with one or two species, odds are Coop's going to be in that failure category. So, I mean, did you mainly just fly imprint coops, or did you fly passage coops also?
No, the ones that I caught a lot of game with were imprints. Yeah. And if I could find my scrapbooks, I could pull out. I've got a picture of one on my head when I'm doing this. I've got another picture of one baiting at my face and me leaning back. I mean, they were game killing birds, but I got older and I was like, I just can't keep doing that. And I tried some passage Coopers, and quite honestly, again, I think time went by, and now I got into falcons, and then especially once captive bred birds came along, because I dearly wanted a peregrine, but not available. And then it was the same year my boy was born. When my wife was pregnant with my boy, I bought that Barbary Peels tiercel, and that was where I really started doing what I wanted to do.
Yeah. So the accipiter, kind of like the coop, was not what you felt like you ultimately were going to continue to be happiest doing by any stretch then?
I've even thought about it today because of what I'm doing, and I can kind of tell you what I am doing today. But I've thought I could be, I think, very successful, more successful for sure in terms of game, I would no way would I ever take one out of a nest, but I take passage Coopers are like flies around here. I mean, it's epidemic proportions in Tucson. You get the right one, and they're great for a dog. Again, you got to get the right one. But I've thought about that because of what I am pursuing with falcons is so much harder. But my problem is that, gosh, it's like, once you've tasted heroin, you just never go back. And that the falcon thing to me is just, it's so addictive. You just get completely strung out on watching those birds stoop.
Yeah.
Yeah. And as I say, I know I could be more successful with accipiters, but and maybe at some point I'll go back, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, the hardcore long wing guys do seem to have one thing in common, is that eventually, at least the ones that I've talked to that have been successful, it seems like they all eventually get an itch eventually to kind of have, at least for a season or two, something with higher numbers, or just, that it's just more kind of,
Yep.
kill, type of deal, as far as, being able to take more head of game and stuff. And usually an accipiter, for a lot of guys,
Right.
tends to fill that, or, kind of scratch that itch in a lot of ways. But yeah, I mean, like I said, I've talked to a lot of people that feel the same way you do. And, having seen certain types of long wing falconry, I can totally understand, how that would be addictive. And, once you start being able to do that consistently and being able, I mean, if you live in an area that still will let you do that, I mean, that's the hardest part with that. You know what I'm saying? I love falcons too, but unfortunately where I live, I'd have to be creative, and I'm trying to figure it out still, if it's even, because how falconry is too. Like, you can't ever do it until you do it.
Right.
Yeah. And, until somebody does it, you can't do it. But then when somebody does it, everybody wants to figure out and emulate how you did it.
Right.
You
Right.
know? I mean, so there's other types of game in my area where I think it could work potentially, but it would just take having to, kind of have a creative approach to, kind of finding just the right areas and doing something that not really anybody's been successful doing so far, which is always tough, you know?
Yeah, it's you have to be dedicated and be willing to kind of go through that learning curve. And I remember that when I had that Barbary Peels tiercel, he was a gamey little bird, but I had to learn how to do it. And I went out, there was a hawking meet, and some guys came over, and the first day we got him into some quail, and it really got screwed up. The second day we kind of snuck out with a small group of people and found quail. The dog pointed, he caught a quail. And I remember a kid coming up to me, and, people are taking pictures at the falconry meet, and he said, "How long did it take you to teach that bird to do that?" And I said, 28 years, at that point in time. That was because it just, it takes a long time. And it reminds me of something Harry said to me one time. He said, and I laughed when he said it, he said, "It's a shame it takes a lifetime to learn how to do this right." And I laughed when he said it. And then, that I've thought about that, and I realized what he was saying. We spend, and I definitely feel this way today, we spend so much of our time learning how to do it and kind of doing exactly what you're saying. Are you going to go off on this tangent, and are you going to pursue that? And I've certainly done that here. Then as I'm, got gray hair now, and I really know what I want to do with birds, and I pray that I have the time and the game to make it happen. But it's what I'm doing right now is not easy. There's certainly, somebody said that if you want to pursue the hardest way there is to catch a fish, take up fly fishing. And, what you're saying, flying a falcon in Tucson, Arizona is not the easiest thing to do. And I know some of the guys have, said, "Hey, I want to get into that. It looks neat." And it's just a lot of work compared to going out with a Harris hawk or a Cooper's hawk and catching game.
Sure.
It's a lot of work, and you've got to really be addicted to it. But, I'm sure you could, in your situation, figure a way to make it happen. but there would be a learning curve. I'll tell you that.
I've already experienced it a little bit.
Yep.
You know, I mean,
Yep.
I had an imprint Tiercel Prairie that I've talked about before, and you know, just as I was about ready to start hunting him, he died of a bacterial infection. And then, you know, I've tried a couple of bigger longwings in my area, and you know, looking back on it, I know now. I mean, just reanalyzing things and seeing all these other guys, you know, through my travels and stuff, and kind of how talking to them, how they do things. And I mean, first of all, I mean, I know one of the mistakes I made was just asking too many people initially, you know, which can be a problem, especially when it comes to long wings. It's, you know, that's a huge, you know, thing that you find out real quick that you shouldn't do. But yeah, no, I totally understand what you're saying. And I mean, just finishing the thought about the coop stuff real quick too. I mean, is there anything in particular that you think that you did with your birds that, I mean, contributed to your success more than anything else?
With coopers?
Yeah, with the coops that you imprinted?
Well, using a dog, certainly, because coopers, especially out here in the desert, man, they just bury themselves. And of course, Harry was the absolute master at, you know, he had these sticks and he'd dig everything out. But I think you can't get greedy at first. You know, when they kill stuff, you got to let them eat it. Honestly, I don't think I would have had those coopers when I was young. How old would I have been? Late teens, early 20s. They wouldn't have been the face grabbers they were if I had been patient. But you can't tell an 18-year-old boy who's strung out on falconry to be patient. So, and so I would try and, you know, kill 3 or 4 quail in a day. And by that 3rd or 4th one, they were starting to resent it. I think, honestly, just putting them in a situation where they can kill, and then I feel the same way about flying falcons. You know, you just got to reward them for what they've done and try and duplicate that same situation again, and hope that the falconry gods smile on you and you can find that situation. You know, that's you work and you work and you work with the bird. And I know, like with young falcons, and you go out and then finally you kill a duck with one, and you just pray that it's not 2 weeks before you see a duck again, you know. That if you can get it on a roll, get 2 or 3 going. And of course, with especially here, I think now finally I can say that you can go out and find some quail. Well, Nate is doing great things with a goshawk and catching quail. And the desert quail, I'd quit hunting them. I mean, our numbers were so low. It was, you know, because I shotgun too, just because of my dogs. You know, I had quit shotgunning, but just to train bird dogs, I got into shotgunning again. And I used to say, you know, some people walk their dogs around the neighborhood. Well, I put 3 shotgun shells in my pocket and go walk my dog out in the desert. 'Cause you'd be lucky to find a quail. But finally, we've had all this great rain, and so that the quail are coming back. So, yeah, I'd really, Nate and I have talked a bunch this year. He's very intrigued hearing about what I'm doing, and he sent me video of his goshawk, and he's to me is kind of following Harry's footsteps. I think he's even in some of the areas where Harry used to fly with the goshawk, and he's got Brittany's, I believe. And and I'd love to pick his brain and see, you know, he seems very successful. So what is he doing to be successful? One of the things I love about Harry, when we used to go to meets, I've never met anybody, especially with, I mean, he's a small man, but his stature as a falconer, that when you would go to meets and he'd meet new people, Harry would listen 80% of the time and talk 20% of the time. And I think that's how he learned. And, you know, I can remember on a couple occasions, Harry would be talking to somebody we didn't know, and he'd look at me and he'd raise his eyebrows and he'd keep listening, you know, and there were some people who told him, like, they told him they had a new way to fly Cooper's hawks, you know, and they'd start, and, you know, this is Harry. They were telling Harry, and I can just remember Harry. And he was never, you know, he's a very polite man. He's definitely the old school gentleman. He would never say anything nasty to anybody. He'd listen, but I'd see his eyebrows go up on some of those great ideas people had. Everybody, I think that's another thing that, and that falconry has shown me because as I've told you, our beginnings, 3 English falconry books, we didn't have a network. We finally ran into the guys that were catching peregrines down at Padre Island. And so that kind of opened up our universe that there really were falcons, guys flying peregrines, But today, everybody seems to want to reinvent the wheel. Mm-hmm. They want, everybody, my sister has said, you need to write a book. And I'm like, about what?
Yeah. I can understand that, but that's the thing though, is, there's a lot of people that think that they don't have anything new to offer just because they've already been, I've had people before that, I've talked about, doing a podcast with or something. They're like, well, I feel like I'm kind of old news in the falconry world now, this, that, and the other. But, I think there's a lot of people that in a way underestimate or undervalue what offering at least, if nothing else, a different medium for people to get information from them. I think that even though there's been books written and, whatever forms of medium for people to absorb information, there's always something, even if it's just the smallest morsel or something that comes out the more that people offer up information sometimes. So, I'm always happy for people whenever they agree to do whatever, it is that they, are offering up to people as far as information and stuff. You never know what is going to come out. Sometimes or come to mind something that, maybe I haven't ever discussed that before, or talked about that before, or so you never know. Maybe whenever you're writing that book, something will come to mind that nobody's ever talked about before.
I think about falconry, and Matt and I, gosh, it's over 50 years we've been doing it, which is, astounding to me, but it humbles you because I remember Pete Youngman used to say that when falconers, you get into falconry, you get strung. If you're going to be a real falconer, you become strung out in falconry. It's part of it. And at the 10-year mark, you begin to think you're something. And you do know a lot. After 10 years, if you've really been flying birds and you're catching game and you're pursuing anything avidly, you do know a lot. But Pete would say that's when you get really dangerous because you begin to think you know a lot. And what I can say after all this time is that falconry just continues to humble me. I whenever I go out with a bird now and with the dogs, it's like I just have to do this right. And I want to, and I can't screw this up. I've got to, and I realize how it takes precision. I want a bird to go up high, and I want a dog to point at, you can read 1,000 books on either of those subjects, but getting it to happen for you in your space of time, it can be very humbling.
For sure, because it doesn't matter how detailed a book may be or whatever, it doesn't always necessarily describe your exact situation and your exact circumstances.
Right.
Or your exact bird or dog.
Right.
So, no, I completely agree. But, well, you mentioned, you kind of briefly touched on, we've kind of already discussed a little bit about, what you've done. But I know we were kind of talking a little bit ago and you kind of brushed over it earlier, but, kind of talking about, the Arizona club and your involvement with that before. And you kind of touched a little bit too about, kind of, being around and being there during, when Arizona was like the first state to be allowed, peregrine take after, what was your experience with all that? I kind of talked to Randy a little bit about this too, but, what was your personal experience with all that and seeing how that evolved and getting all that worked out? What went on?
Well,
into all that?
I definitely, as I had said to you before we started, I wanted to be one of the first ones. I dearly wanted to fly a peregrine legally, a wild peregrine legally. And we went to, there were meetings with the Game and Fish. Some of that stuff was so discouraging. And our Game and Fish, all in all, I think is the department's pretty good. They lean heavily on biology, but there were so many lawsuits and stuff that, because we got permits, I think 2 years. I had a peregrine tag, and I'd get a call, and they'd say, not only would I get a call from somebody in the Game and Fish, but the guy from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife would call me and say, you cannot take a peregrine, even though I had that tag, and because there were more lawsuits. And so it was a thing where you did have to be involved, and we went to the meetings, and when we finally believed we had it in hand, and I think it was the third year, actually. And I can't remember, I probably had a tag. But again, don't get too excited about that piece of paper. But I went to a commission meeting with my boy, and the peregrine take was on the agenda, the very last thing on the agenda. Meeting opened at 8, and when they were turning the lights off at 5 o'clock, they got to the peregrine take. And one of the Game and Fish guys gave my boy a Game and Fish hat, because he said, he's pretty good to sit with you this long in that room and listen to all the discussion about deer herds and mountain lions and all this stuff. But I thank the commissioners for, sticking with biology. And they, at the end they said, well, you guys are going to get your peregrines. So it took a lot of work, and I'll never forget that, especially going to that meeting. It meant so much to me. And going out with the guys when we finally went, finding nests. I mean, you can find peregrines, but cliffs that we were going to climb. And we found some peregrines in some neat places. I've actually seen a couple of peregrine nests that were walk-in nests. Some of them are nests 30 feet off the ground, in crazy places. But when we finally did that, I mean, I was the guy in Arizona for a while, and I loved it, every minute of it. I don't remember exactly how many. I think I've taken 5 of them myself, eyases. And I still have that falcon from the first year. This year is 20 years of our peregrine take. Amazingly, we still can't do the passages, but it was a really wonderful time to climb into peregrine eyries. It was exciting, and to do it with some people. I met some wonderful people. Guys came from different parts of the country, and I met them and helped them, and to see their excitement, and then people writing me and telling me how their birds were doing. It was just a wonderful, and quite honestly, I mean, I was stoned on peregrines. I mean, they were my life. I wrote, when I got that bird, Mystique, I wrote an article for the NAFA Journal called To Take a Peregrine, and there's pictures of us throwing the ropes and pictures of us with the eyases and all that, and just talking about how we'd waited 30 years, because I remember when my aunt told me that peregrine falcons went on the endangered species list. My aunt was an avid birder. About the time I thought, hey, I think I'm kind of interested in these things, and they became an endangered species. But to be able to write that article and just talk about what a thrill it was to get those birds, and I would like, at some point in time, I guess Mystique will let me know, I want to write another article and call it To Fly a Peregrine, because she became, I wanted a tiercel. I really wanted a tiercel, and ended up with the falcon. I did not intend to keep her. I've killed more game with her than any bird I've ever had. In her heyday, she was just a flying gorilla. I mean, she flew high, she flew low, but God, she killed ducks. I had a great lab that flew with her. It was just, I really had a wonderful time. And the second year, I got a tiercel, finally little Johnny, and he became famous in his own right. That's where I think little Johnny, well, I'd had that tiercel, I told you about the Barbary peels, and I learned to love the way those little bitty, he was a 500-gram bird, and the way they just yo-yo in the air and just up and down and up and down, and they're just their energy. And, it's one thing to see Mystique can miss a duck, and she can go in and bind to a mallard drake and ride it to the ground and rodeo it and subdue it. But to see tiercels do it, a 500 and whatever gram tiercel is a whole different thing. And I think that's where I really learned to love the energy of tiercels. And to this day, I will say that I think tiercel peregrines are my favorite bird, although those passage tiercel prairies they've come on real strong. But the whole peregrine thing, I really felt, I definitely was in the middle of it, and I loved it. And then Matt Murray, who is a younger guy that I helped him get one, and Matt, I think it got electrocuted. He was absolutely heartbroken. But through the years, Matt's gotten, we've gotten more peregrines, and Matt's kind of become the guy, and I'm glad. I'm not going to be climbing any more cliffs. I've counted one time, I've been down to peregrine eyries in Arizona 12 times, and what a thrill to do it. But I'm really look forward to the passages, true passages, not the catch them before September passages. Those aren't passages. They're recently fledged. There's a big difference. They haven't met the angel of death yet. A true passage has met the angel of death. But yeah, the whole peregrine thing became, it was, and it, in the middle of all that was when our laws were going to change. And Arizona had to adopt, the new federal stuff. And so that's when I became the president of the club. And that was a miserable couple of years for me. I got to meet and work with some wonderful people, but one thing I realized very quickly that some of the people I was working with were much more qualified to do. And once I realized that these guys could take the ball and go the right direction with it, I just wanted to make sure that Arizona was very divided, and there's history behind that. There was like two clubs, and there was kind of the Republicans and the Democrats kind of thing. And that was not good. How are you going to sit with the game and fish and do all that? And so that was my big plea as president. Let's all get on the same page. And we don't have to go fly birds together. We don't have to even like each other, but let's work together and get a good set of falconry laws. And Charlie Kaiser, who was the guy who was vice president or whatever underneath me, ended up taking over, and he was much more adept at and took what I started and gave us great falconry laws. So at that time, between the peregrines and doing that, I was very involved with the club. So it was neat to get involved with the falconry community.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of work.
Yes.
Anything that, I mean, especially it's a lot of work for no pay, and it really is. I mean, there's so much that goes into being a part of, being on a board position of a falconry club, or really, I mean, it's any club, but it's a falconry club in particular that, I mean, unless you do it, you really can't appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
And, it seems like every year it's kind of an ongoing, I wouldn't say battle, but it's hard to get people to get more involved at times. Yep. And it's really hard keeping people, I don't know, engaged. And you try your best, but I mean, I kind of became more involved with our state club this past year. Mm-hmm. And, now having sat in on some of these different things and taking on just the role of being kind of like communications and putting together our twice a year, publication and stuff and things like that. I mean, people don't realize, it really is a lot of work.
Yeah.
And,
Yep.
like I said, I kind of understand both sides, because unless you become more involved and take on a role like that and eventually do your part and take over for the people that, eventually will resign from those positions or
Right.
whatever, it's really hard to appreciate just how much work goes into all that.
Yep.
So, I mean, kudos to you for doing that for your club, and especially being involved at a time where I'm sure that the workload was that much bigger.
Yeah,
than,
and
than typical.
again, the club was so divided. That was so hard.
Yeah.
And I just recently, somebody has nominated me to be one of the directors, and I accepted the nomination. And I'm retired, kind of. I closed my business, and so my life is a little bit simpler. And I thought, it might be time to give back. And I'm not going to be the guy in the front. But I do think now I have a perspective. I can give people perspective. And I think I can do it in a reasonable manner.
Yeah, and doing it in a manner in which people are going to be receptive and listen is a whole other thing too,
Yeah.
which is always a challenge as well. But
That's never guaranteed.
for sure. But, so basically, as far as your long wing then with peregrines and tiercel prairies and stuff, is it pretty much, duck and quail then that you're going to continue to pursue then in the foreseeable future, or is there other things that you're wanting to do with your long winging?
Yeah, staying in the state. Yeah, I'd love to be able to travel, and Hungarian partridge have always fascinated me. I'm not a guy who wants to kill the biggest bird out there, so I've never. Although I marvel at these guys catching their sage grouse and stuff, the big falcons. I've watched some guys fly some big ger falcons and stuff. They're amazing birds, but I just have never really been attracted. Again, I those little tiercels just call to me, and I dove quail and ducks, and I with Mystique and Little Johnny, and then a couple of other birds along the way. I've killed a whole bunch of ducks, and by no means am I. There's Matt Mitchell's probably killed 10 ducks every duck I've killed, but I've killed a bunch of ducks, and I've had a lot of fun doing it. But what I really love is hunting over pointing dogs. And so quail. But, the hard part for us is we went into a 20-year drought after I got here. And as I said, it was not worth looking for quail in the desert. And I started hunting Mearns quail with a shotgun. And the Mearns quail down by the border, different species, not so dependent on the rain as the desert quail, and had a lot of fun with my dogs hunting Mearns quail. But then I decided, I guess 9 years ago, I said, I want to kill a Mearns quail with a falcon. My wife is the one who saw an ad. I don't remember, it was on a forum, but a guy had these setters for sale. Tony Houston in New Mexico had these setters, and I got this crazy red dog that I have. But I one time Harry the Prairie, that prairie that I'd gotten from Harry, the day before he was killed by the eagle, I went out down to Sonoyta, and I had a German short hair, and short hair's going through the hills and points, and Harry the Prairie goes up, and he's half a mile away. He's doing his Harry the Prairie thing, and then taking forever to come back. And the dog was pointing for at least 10 minutes, wouldn't move. And I finally said, I'm going to teach him a lesson. I'm the one who got the lesson, because when I went over and flushed those quail, it was Mearns quail. And he, of course, he came barreling down, but he was too far away. And the quail put in, and I went down the next day and told Harry, and then the bird got killed. But from that point onward, I've killed scaled quail. I grew up in New Mexico with scaled quail, and then Gamble's is the thing that we've hunted the most of here. Never have killed a Mearns quail with a falcon. So I got this setter, and that was my mission with that setter, is I want to kill a Mearns quail with a falcon over that setter. well, we got the setter, and she's not the perfect dog, but she loves quail and points quail and holds her points. But trying to get the right falcon became quite a challenge. And I did some rehab falcons, rehab peregrines. And never, I was hoping, because you always have the option if we could release them or we could keep them, and that none of them ever panned out. They just were not going to be falconry birds. But as I told you, my most recent bird now, hard to believe, 5 years, I've had this little passage tercel prairie. A guy had this bird up in Phoenix, and somebody gave him a tercel peregrine. He had trapped it, and I think kind of got it going up, and that was about it. And I got the bird and really didn't do anything with it the first season, and said, I'm going to start the next season. And the next season, that bird just took off and started going up. And I started putting a quail in the launcher and bringing the dog in. And I went through some years. I had a lot of responsibilities that kept me from pursuing it the way I wanted to. But I did a lot of that, quail in the launcher, and releasing quail and putting them out and just letting the dog go. And it was as close to being real as it could be. And that just because of the things I had going on in my life, I couldn't get out and hunt. But the last 2 years, I've gotten Tanner Schaub over in New Mexico, said, we got a bunch of quail, bring that bird over here. And Tanner, I told him, Tanner, this bird goes up really high, and this dog. And he's like, yeah, I want to see if you're, And I remember I met Tanner 2 years ago, and I went out and we found some dove, and it was later in the day, and I'd just gotten over there. He said, well, let's fly some dove. And so I remember when I unhooded the bird, he said, well, we're going to find out whether you're full of crap, aren't we? And when they were, trying to find the damn bird binoculars, it's like, and then the bird smashed this dove down in front of us, and Tanner's like, holy moly. And I'm like, no, I wasn't kidding, Tanner.
Yeah.
And we did the same thing the next couple of days with quail. Honestly, what I have, and a lot of people listening to this will laugh, this prairie has his biggest fault is he goes too high, but it's so much fun to watch. I've had a number of flights that if he was half the pitch he was at, he probably would have got the quail. But to see, the dog holding that point and have that bird come over at 800 feet and stoop from that pitch is awesome. And even though what I've gotten to see is quail getting knocked around, knocked into bushes, and it just hasn't panned out. I'm like, I come back when I get to see my dog find quail and hold a point and see that bird come down, I'm good.
That's how a lot of long-winged guys are. It stops being about, the number of game in the bag and more about the flights. And that's what I keep hearing more and more when I talk to long-winged guys. But
right. And I'm hoping that this year, again, I'm kind of retired, and I'm hoping that I know the bird and the dog now, and I'll have to get them both tuned up, in the fall, but to really go back out and start looking for Mearns quail, because the falconry season, I can hunt Mearns quail long before the gun season and see if I can get out. Mearns quail became very, very popular. People heard about it, the internet's a wonderful thing and it's a horrible thing. And all the bird dog guys found out, hey, they got these quail in Arizona that don't run. They hold for a dog, and they became very popular. But the trick is getting them. And the other thing is they're in oak-filled canyons, but they're out in the grasslands too. So I want to put a Mearns quail in the bag with the falcon. And I've still got the old bird, 20 years. Of course, last year we didn't hunt ducks because of the virus thing, the influenza. But I'll put her. I let her fly a few laps last year, but I'll get her out. I've even thought about putting her over Mearns quail. why not?
Yeah, why not? Yeah, I mean, yeah. If
In
that's
her day, she was one agile peregrine. I mean, because I flew her around so many of the ponds around here with mesquites and stuff, she did stuff that most guys would never want to see their falcon do. She was very agile, but I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah. Well, you've got options, and that's the important thing. So, I mean, best of luck to you on that, whatever you do decide to do. But I'm going to go ahead and end us on the same note that I have been with a lot of other guys that I've been talking to recently, guys and gals, and just want to get whatever piece of advice you think you would like to pass on to future generations or even current falconers, and just call it good after that. And yeah, just whatever piece of advice or sentiment that you think is really important, and we'll call it good.
Well, I guess the biggest thing, and I kind of touched on it earlier, is that going forward for me, I'm certainly heading toward my golden years as a falconer. But the biggest thing that's going to be a challenge in the future is the game that we hunt, having the habitat. And I think that falconers are going to have to be, we talked about all the organizations, and you can pick your own, but people have to be involved with the conservation and trying, because without the game, it doesn't matter. I would say that to me, going forward, that would probably be the most important thing I could tell people is get involved, because you can get any species of peregrine you want. You can, get eagles, you can get whatever you want, but if you don't have the game to fly them at, it's nonsense. So, that's my biggest concern. And, here in Arizona, we've finally been blessed with a bunch of rain. So I think our quail are coming back. They're still overgrazing the hell out of the desert out there. But it's just be involved with that. And because that's, to me, that's the big crux of the future of falconry, is the game that we hunt.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's only going to get harder. And, well, I mean, like I said, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. And I'm glad that we could figure it out and work it out. Mm-hmm. In person is always so much better than remote, And like I said, it's given me a chance to drive through a state that I love and still kind of hold a special place for it in my heart. So it's been nice being able to kind of trek around a little bit, even though it's tiring.
Right. Yeah.
But like I said, I really appreciate you. Appreciate your time, and I'm thankful for you all bringing me out. So.
Yeah. Well, appreciate you coming down. It was fun.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you had a good time, and we'll just go ahead and call it good. And until next time, I'm sure that we could do another part 2, just like could with Randy and probably pretty much everybody I'm going to end up talking to on this trip. But anyway, like I said, we'll go ahead and call it good, and we will talk again soon.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
All right, appreciate you, Tim.
Yep.